I think across the board, the collaborative aspect of this work has been something that has quite stood out and something that always tends to surprise me a little bit. I think we go into a lot of these conversations thinking that the answers are going to be no, or that they might be really challenging to get to. But I think there's just this incredible collaborative effort when it comes to solving sustainability challenges or getting people on board to do this work.
Welcome back to another episode of Renewable Rides, and today we're going to delve into how we build a sustainable future with Sotiria Anagnostou. Sotiria is the Executive Director of AZ CleanTech and a powerhouse in the realms of corporate sustainability, climate tech, and the real estate industry. She has a rich background shaping sustainability initiatives at giants like Whirlpool, Ingevity Chemicals, Federated Investors, and Store Capital, to name but a few. And she's been at the cutting edge of technology and sustainability practices. Most recently, she's embarked on an amazing mission to position Arizona as a significant hub for climate tech innovation. We're going to delve into her personal passion for understanding climate risk and how technology can help create profitable and sustainable solutions for businesses globally. So let's go. Sotiria, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. As always, we'd love to start out by getting to know you. What are you passionate about?
Well, I'm excited to be here and excited to talk to you about what I'm passionate about. I'm going to stick with the climate themes because that's really, really where the core of my background and what I think about a lot is. And when it comes to climate, I'm passionate about climate risk, really understanding how climate change is impacting different groups of people, what makes them adaptable and resilient to those impacts that will change across the globe and by different types of communities of people. And so I've always been really passionate about understanding how those impacts will really connect with people. And then the second thing I'm passionate about is solutions to reducing those impacts. So new technology that'll lessen the impacts of climate change. So I think what it comes down to is I really care about people living an enjoyable life despite climate change. So how do we make those impacts less intensive on people so we can still enjoy the things that we like to enjoy and go out and enjoy being outside?
Thank you for doing what you do. Let's go back a bit. Where'd you grow up? Where did this passion for climate come from?
Yeah, I originally grew up in the Midwest in northern Indiana, spent a lot of time outside in the summer at summer camp, sailing, canoeing, just being outside with my friends, and just loved that time, especially because the wintertime we're always stuck inside. But I think my true passion for sustainability or, understanding climate change was freshman year of college. I went on a semester-long Outward Bound program. And so we were really spending the full semester outdoors, camping, sailing, just the whole thing. And a lot of the work that we were doing or just being outside intersected with the economy in general. So we would, we'd be out doing our thing, but we'd see big factories in the background just with lots of pollution and some of that pollution entering the waterways where we were out either researching or just, kayaking through and doing our development type work. And so that's when I came back from that program, really knowing that intersection between the natural environment and the economies that we need to survive and to live will intersect really drastically in my lifetime. And so I think that was really that like big solidifier for me on I need to work in this space. It's always going to be a big issue. Yeah,
I can relate to that quite a bit. Well, and so what are you focusing on now? Introduce some of the things that you're working on, and how did you get here in your professional career?
Yeah, so I was in school for a long time. I studied in the early 2000s, so there weren't a lot of sustainability jobs or climate jobs at the time. So when I graduated with a political science and environmental studies degree from my bachelor's at Marietta College, I went and got a master's in energy and environmental analysis. So I knew I needed to dig in a little bit better and a little bit more and build up those skills. So when I could get a job in sustainability, I'd have them. During that time, I got really interested in these social and human dimensions of climate change and how they impact people. And so I continued into my PhD, focused on climate risk and adaptation. So long academic background, and then immediately, once graduating, transitioned into corporate sustainability. So I got a job at Whirlpool Corporation on their sustainability team. We were working with the engineers, developing innovative ways to reduce the emissions from our products. So Whirlpool makes KitchenAid, Maytag, kind of those home appliance components. And then, but I was also doing Scope 3 reporting at that time. So the aspect of Scope 3 for a company like that is products in use and the emissions that come from that. So we were trying to figure out how much energy came out of thousands of products that we've sold over the past, how many years. And so it was a really big task to figure that out at those really early stages of people starting to calculate their Scope 3 emissions. But then from there, I've always stayed in that corporate sustainability or ESG space. So I've worked for a few different companies in a few different industries. I moved to a performance chemicals or a specialty chemicals and performance materials company, heading up their sustainability and ESG program. And then from there, I shifted a little bit over and went to an investment firm where I was helping the investors think through which factors of ESG are financially material for their different investments and investment vehicles. And then from there, it led into working for a real estate investment trust. So a little bit on the investor side, but then a little back into that corporate sustainability piece. And that's where I really got interested in some of this new technology. So a big part of my role was working with the tenants of our commercial real estate buildings and finding ways that met the owner's expectations, so the company I worked for, but then also, being applicable for the tenants as well. And then kind of finding some of those solutions and helping the tenants see through why they should adopt those technologies. So that's when I really started getting close to the climate tech companies and figuring that out.
Sotiria, a question on the PhD to corporate transition. A lot of people always complain that people who have studied for so long have no practical application, and that's definitely not the case for you. You've had a really nice, diverse career. But how was that initial transition from being sort of hyper focused on a particular topic to then opening up the aperture and trying to figure out how to execute?
That is a very tough transition to make. I think more so in handling other people's expectations of that. So I knew that I always needed a job. Even though I was going to focus on the environmental issues and climate, I knew that I always needed to maintain some kind of level of understanding around business and how this is going to translate into something someone's going to pay me to do. So I always had to keep that in mind throughout school. So I took a lot of economics courses and always tried to connect the work that I was doing into a business setting. So luckily I had that mindset all through school that I need to figure out a way to make a job out of this. And then, but transitioning after graduating and looking for that first job took quite a while and quite a decent amount of convincing that I understood the business aspects. And I wasn't just trying to, completely get a huge corporation to turn into a B Corp, but it was a lot of transitioning and making sure other people understood that I understood how I could integrate myself into the business setting. But it was challenging. But I tried to always keep that mindset. So that was helpful. And I still do that all the time. Try to take a balanced approach between some of the strategies that we try to push forward, but then how it connects to the larger economy or the businesses that we're working within.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's great. In terms of advice for other people who are thinking about PhDs, would you have done it over again?
It was really tough. And I think for me at the time, like I said, I really wanted to work in this space and sustainability, but there were so few jobs at the time that this lended me just a level of credibility that I'm not sure that helped me get some of those first jobs. I think getting a PhD is extremely valuable if you have reasons for getting it, but it's a significant time commitment that takes away from other things that you might be committing your time to. So I think it's definitely a big consideration and not something to jump into. But if you have those strong reasons why you're doing it, then I think it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, we're all in good company. I think more and more people we meet in this industry, we all come from environmental science backgrounds, interestingly, because I think that was probably the primary course available back in the day. And so it's really interesting to see how many people went that route initially. Now you're in a leadership role at AZ CleanTech. Do you want to tell us what that is, why you started it, and what the desired mission is and outcome?
Absolutely. So I'm really excited about AZ CleanTech and serving as the executive director there and really helping to be a founding member of the organization. So it is a nonprofit based here in Arizona, so AZ CleanTech. And we developed it, me and a few other partners, so that we could really bring together that clean tech and climate tech community here in Arizona. There's a strong startup community here, and there's a lot of established organizations that help support that. But none of them really had a clear track in clean tech or in sustainability, but always, wanted to support that. But the needs of founders and the community around clean tech is nuanced and a little bit different than others. So we really wanted to start pulling, and there was enough people here to really pull it into its own organization. So we started it with a few meetups just to see who would come, and we had a lot of people come. So there was clearly a strong need for this type of work. So we created this official nonprofit, and we host monthly meetups to bring people together. So both startup founders, people that work at startups, mid-sized companies, but then also the corporates that use this technology or might partner with a lot of these companies. So it really is developing a solid ecosystem to think through challenges, implement some, activities, and build a general community in this area. It has spurred into a lot of partnerships and relationships that we're building, which is really nice. Arizona has just a great environment here for sustainability. So big environmental impacts are going to happen here. Climate change. We have water issues, heat issues, changing conditions in general. World-class talent. We have a great university, Arizona State University, I think 11 years in a row as #1 in innovation. Strong sustainability school. I think the president, Michael Crow, was just included in the Times 100 for climate or something quite significant. So there's a strong pull from Arizona State and just a ton of resources. And then the NSF opened up SWIZI, which is the Southwest Sustainability Innovation Engine, which is a large grant for developing kind of that clean tech ecosystem as well. And so we're hoping to, spend some time working with them, developing some new startups or kind of incubating and accelerating those, but also bringing the whole community together. So I'm very passionate about that work. I'd love to see Arizona kind of take up a really solid lead in that climate tech and clean tech ecosystem, given all the resources we have here and this incredible talent pool and communities that are already here. So I'm excited to see how that continues to mature over 2025.
I think it's a much needed organization to help fill that gap, having spent about 6 years in the Arizona startup ecosystem. I can see the gap that you guys are helping fill there. So good on you and your team for pulling this together. I'd love to there's a good transition into, so sustainability, broad term, specifically to the real estate industry. Can you talk to us a little bit about how sustainability is being integrated into the real estate industry?
Yeah. I think just like I'll start with some of the areas where it's integrated in most industries. So there's that component of reporting that needs to happen. So data collection, following frameworks that are fairly established. Investors are asking questions. So you pull all this data together from a corporate perspective and you report on it. And so that's, something that happens everywhere. And that's really important because investors use that information because some factors of ESG are financially material. And then your company uses that information to make decisions. So we all love database decision making, and we need it because sustainability isn't just a nice to have. It really needs to happen, but we need that underlying information to prioritize different activities and figure out how to make it happen. When it comes to real estate, though, there's some really interesting pushes and pulls when it comes to sustainability. So from the data perspective, getting emissions data from buildings is tricky and really tough. And there's a lot of challenges to that all differ based on the type of building, type of industry, what's happening there. And then when you talk about a real estate company who owns more than one building, many, many buildings, trying to do this at scale is really challenging. So I worked for a company that had 3,000 commercial real estate buildings scattered throughout the United States with no major pull in any one state or any one region. And so trying to, get energy data for one building's tough. 3,000, really, really tough. So that's one area where it can be really tricky. And then I think the dynamic between all the different players when it comes to real estate is also unique to that area. So when I, worked for a manufacturing facility, we made our decisions based internally. We'd have our upstream supply chain, our downstream supply chain, but we still got to make our own decisions, and we could put pressure on those different things, but we didn't always have to agree on everything. We could still continue on with the business. But when it comes to real estate, you've got stakeholders that have an almost equal pull and push, or it's hard to determine who has maybe a little more pull and push in some of those relationships. So you have the building owner, you have the tenant, and then you have the property manager. And that's just the three basic ones that typically are there, but there can also be a lot more complexity within that or in addition to that. So I think that like try to triangulate those decisions and who has ownership of what can be really challenging.
Did you have any ways of navigating that, Sotiria? Because we see this quite a lot. I love that you led with the data piece, because we see that the biggest challenge a lot of business leaders have is just not knowing what's possible and then not having the confidence to act. And that often comes in the form of not having the right intelligence and the right data to actually make informed decisions, especially when it ties back to the economic outcomes. Because as you say, everyone's kind of competing for capital, and it's all about driving a profitable next step with sort of beneficial outcomes as well. Are there any war stories where it didn't work, or any like real success stories where you've seen kind of coordinating those stakeholders has worked out?
Yeah, this has happened, I think, a few times in my career where I have come in as their first full-time sustainability hire. And so, you come in and you likely you're meeting with the executive team pretty frequently in the beginning, trying to build one-on-one relationships. And there's a varied level of understanding around how sustainability impacts the business or ESG in general. And so you're really trying to work that relationship and build that relationship, at the same time try to gauge where that other person is, where that executive team member is on the spectrum of understanding how it impacts their business and how receptive they are to those things. So I always kind of love that beginning part where you're trying to figure this out. And then once you get, a month or two under your belt, CEO calls you to do a little presentation in front of the whole executive team all together. And that's where you get to pull all the data together about the different stakeholders and who's asking for this data and how they're using it. And you can kind of tell that it's an eye-opening experience when especially the CEO is starting to understand how these things impact their business, but it varies by that team. So I think coming in with that understanding of those stakeholders is really important. I think executive teams tend to really care about investor perspectives. And so coming in with like a solid understanding of what the different investment firms, what their policies are on ESG and how they're not necessarily even their policies, but how they're thinking about different factors of ESG being financially material, and being able to explain that to a full executive team in front of their whole cohort is really powerful, because they're able to ask some tough questions because they have their colleagues around them, but they're also receptive and understanding that, their colleagues are taking this seriously and it's going to impact areas of the business. So it's always really challenging to come in and be the first person to kind of focus on this when it's something outside of their normal day-to-day, but it can also be really exciting because you can really get people on board pretty quickly once you use some of those strong arguments around business impacts.
And do you feel like right now, Sotiria, have you seen the shift from this being kind of, I know I need to be thinking about it, to actually now, we're hearing capital markets are putting money into real estate and offering better financial terms for more ESG friendly or sustainability friendly companies. We're seeing people worried about insurance risks. We're seeing people worried about essentially having stranded assets because maybe they haven't got enough energy resilience or they're in flood zones. Like, are you seeing it bubbling up to being actually a critical executive leadership team discussion around how do we actually protect our organization versus how do we adopt this nice to have metric in our annual report?
There is absolutely. There's been a tremendous shift, I think, over the past couple of years, and we have these, 2-step forwards, 1-step back moments, but those 2-step forwards are coming in pretty quickly. I think there's still a decent amount of, small and mid-sized companies or those that aren't publicly traded that still haven't really grasped the complexity here or don't really focus on it. But I'm not sure. That comes and goes depending on who I speak to. But in general, companies are really starting to understand how these things can impact their business and are taking it quite seriously. The insurance, I've heard so much about insurance or people asking questions around insurance over the past 6 months. And that conversation's been happening for a long time, but it's been a shift in sincerity over the past couple of months. So I think it's definitely top of mind for a lot of people. And they're expecting a significant impact on the business in terms of how much it's going to cost them to do this. I think they're also really trying to figure out what it means by resilience. How do they build a resilient building or adapt a building to be more resilient, and what that means. So I think there's a lot of people really taking this quite seriously. And then with the floods in Asheville, that was just a prime example that things that might not be in flood zones can still have really drastic impacts from the environment that we weren't really ready to predict and ready for. So I think that I've heard that from a lot of people in a very business minded sense that was a light bulb moment.
So can you spend a minute or two running through a couple examples of kind of aspects of sustainability that fall into that financial materiality bucket? Because I think a lot of our listeners are trying to drive change, trying to drive action within their companies, looking for ways to get the attention of the investment committee or the board. But I think tying it back to financial materiality is a really strong pathway. What are some examples of that you've seen be successful in that world?
I'll start that with, it varies by industry, size of company, and type of company. So that's why we have things like SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, that can help us think through which factors are material by industry. So that's always the first place I start. So download the one of the industry. Since I've changed industries a few times, that's a great one to start with. So that conversation is underlined by that fact that it changes by a few different factors on which areas are financially material. But when it comes to manufacturing, per se, a field that I've worked in a couple of times, your supply chain has a big financial impact. So if climate change is impacting your supply chain, then that can have a very significant financial impact. And climate change will continue to impact that supply chain because we can't necessarily, hurricanes are getting longer and more pronounced and some other climate risks like that. So supply chain's a big one for manufacturing. And then also resiliency of your manufacturing facilities. So where they're located in the world, if they're going to have climate change impacts on the facility or on the employees that's needed to run that facility, can also be quite significant. So chemical companies or manufacturing companies are sometimes located along the coast. So a hurricane might come up, and while the plant might be completely fine, the town's expected all the people to evacuate. And so they're not there to run the shifts. Or I've seen instances where a manufacturing facility is on a hill and it never floods, so no risk there, but all the roads to get into that facility might flood. So these types of things can pose big financial components to an organization that are climate related. So business continuity plans are extremely important that integrate climate risk and some of these other types of risks. So lately, I've been focused on climate risk, as you can tell from my answers, but those ones have significant financial materiality. And then some of the others, even reputation can have a big impact on that, and a perceived reputation. So depending on the industry, especially if they're direct to customers and then customers are concerned about something they may have heard, can have an impact. So those kind of things do technically fall sometimes under environmental, social, and governance issues.
I think as I listen to you, it's I think for people that are in it can tend to get a bit overwhelming with all the different pathways you can go down. And so I'd imagine technology is playing a bigger and bigger role in managing the whole landscape, and not just from a tracking and reporting perspective, but actually driving change. What are some of the pieces of technology or tools that you've used that you found helpful in addressing these challenges?
One that I've used a little bit, but is getting much, much better, is an AI tool, so an artificial intelligence tool that can help optimize efficiency in manufacturing. So, you hire a sustainability manager, and they can come and give you some workarounds and add sensors to the machines, and you can understand your energy usage. But there are new AI tools that can really carefully, identify where there might be areas of opportunity, but then also troubleshoot in a way that a human just wouldn't be able to do at the scale that's needed. And so they can ingest full user manuals of heavy machinery or operating equipment that I wouldn't be able to do, and no climate risk and no sustainability risk. And so these types of AI tools can really just ingest a tremendous amount of data and give you feedback. And then, if they make a suggestion, then you can tell it, hey, that suggestion doesn't work because of this reason. And then they can troubleshoot it. Whereas if I give a suggestion and someone comes back to me and is like, oh, there's a nuance to this and we can't do that, then I've got to go back and spend, days to research what that alternative is. And so I think we're going to see that component really escalate quickly. And some of those new tools are very different than the tools we saw 2 years ago. And so I think they're going to be really have just a great return on it, like almost immediate return on investment. So I'm excited about those and seeing how they can support this.
I love that. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about, digital twins and, being able to try stuff before you implement. And I think this really speaks to what you're saying. And the guy's analogy was, if you're flying on a plane and your pilot has this like awesome idea of something that he wants to try that's super unique or different, you don't want that pilot to be doing it while you've got a plane full of 400 people, because lots of things can go wrong. You want them to go and practice it in the simulator, see whether it works, and then bring it back into the operation. And I think you're speaking to that in terms of how can we test more and more of these things in the digital environment, use AI, use data science, optimize. And then when we feel like we've landed a slam dunk and we've proven or disproven the theory, then let's go and implement it instead of putting the entire plane at jeopardy. So I really like that sort of rate.
So that's a great example. And I think even just taking it a little bit further, the sims of 10 years ago, you could probably type in, 10 different data points, like humidity's at this and winds coming at this. And now those sims can look at every single avenue of that current scenario and run that in a couple minutes and then tell your pilot, yep, that's safe to do. And so you're probably getting a much more accurate depiction of how it'll actually turn out in real life than those models of the past. So it's an exciting time.
Yeah. And we certainly pushing this a lot on the energy front, because I think, speaking to insurance and risk and all these things, I think more and more businesses are facing the energy cost escalations, more power outages. Like, these are becoming very front of mind. When you've gone to implement these technologies and you're getting some of that resistance internally, or just like people not being aware of the opportunity, like, how have you navigated that?
I try to take as conversational approach as I can with anyone that I'm speaking to, because I think People don't always like to recognize that they don't know things, especially if they've been in an industry for a long time. So if I come in brand new at a company in an industry they've been in for 30 years and I'm like, oh, look at all these new ideas, then let me teach you about them, then that doesn't always go over that well. And so I try to take this conversational approach and really acknowledge that they have expertise that I don't have. I'm bringing in one perspective or a different perspective, and how does it match in with the expertise and understanding that they already have of an industry and a role that they know better than I'll ever know. And so I think coming in is I want to collaborate with you. I want to understand your information and your background. And I want to help you have the additional tools you need to think through these things is the approach that I've taken. I tend to work for mid-sized companies that have a really long history, a really solid workforce that's been there for a long time. And I'm definitely coming in as the new idea and the new person. And so I take it very seriously in recognizing that they have an expertise that I do not have. I don't have all the answers. I have a new set of partial answers that I have to have them to solve the rest of the way. So that's how it works for me. But I know that you guys are doing a lot of work under, educating people on how this goes. So do you have any tips or thoughts on how that's been for some of the work that you guys do?
I can take a stab at it first, and I was going to kind of pose the question to you and see what your experience has been on this front. But the thing that we've found when we're supporting clients to deploy energy systems in this particular case is really focusing on it, tying it back to the economics. Projects that have sound economics, there's going to be the other benefits. There's going to be decarbonization benefits. There's going to be being able to ride through an outage or have better quality power. But even those, you tie them back to lost productivity or lost actual materials in the manufacturing process. And so it still ultimately comes back to an economic calculation, which, when you're talking about folks that have been in a business for a long time, or you're presenting something to the CFO or to a board, if you can speak to it in language that they're comfortable with, if you're presenting, here's the IRR for this particular project, or here's the capex and the net present value of the future cash flows that we're going to get. And by the way, we're going to reduce our carbon emissions by 45%, and we're going to be able to do all these great things with that news story. We find that is what ultimately gets the kind of the legacy business to move, if you will. But I'm curious, like, how much have you kind of leaned on those economic factors?
I loved that answer, Dan. That was fantastic. I definitely lean on those financial and business components of this work quite significantly. So focusing on our stakeholders and what their interests are, and then trying to match that language is so important. But has been really tough for me, coming from a very different background and then switching industries a few times and never really being fully embedded into certain teams. I don't always know what shows up on their end of month roundup, but trying to figure that out is important. And then finding a buddy at the company that can help explain some of that for me has been really helpful at the early stages of my career. Someone that knows the business, knows business in general, that can help translate some of the things that are important from my perspective into the right business language that matches the company and the teams that you're working with. But I've never been one to lean on sustainability is the right thing to do, because everybody has different perspectives on that. But tying it back into the business, is this a risk reduction component? Is there a way to save money here or make money here that we weren't able to do before? Does this help with environmental health and safety? And trying to quantify those things and leaning on those is extremely important. Going on the values component of sustainability or ESG, it doesn't give you that solid foundation to grow off of like some of these other things do.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the only thing I'd add to it all is, we're seeing more and more of especially on the larger end of businesses, is the kind of capital allocation committees or committees being formed within organizations to actually make these non-standard business decisions. Because I think businesses got very used to, what they do best, and they have a process for it. But everyone's so busy and everyone's got a lot on the plate. Actually having a cross section of the business being able to come together in a forum and talk about how is this going to impact ops? How is this going to impact finance, sustainability? How do we make sure that everyone gets a win-win out of this? And being able to tie it back to those core values, I think is huge. So yeah, completely love that. And I think the more organizations can think about how can we streamline the process of decision making without having to get every single business, every single stakeholder coming together. Like if you can have representatives who can be empowered to make those decisions, I think things run a lot smoother.
And as this data gets more advanced too, we no longer have 1 year of some of this data, we have 10 years of it. And so getting to the point where, okay, this data is good and we've got enough of it to be able to make decisions, I think is important. And I think we're seeing some of the ESG frameworks advancing that too. So they're rolling off some questions that everyone's been answering for the past 5 years and not necessarily giving those the same credit that they were before, and then making some more advanced ones. So getting to a point where we are like, okay, we're good at this. We've done this. Now what's next? And I think we're at a transition phase for a lot of companies into, okay, phase 1 of our sustainability program is finished now. Now, what does phase 2 look like? And how do we actually make that transition? Is where a lot of people are. And I think it's a little bit of a struggle given we don't know the future, but we've never known the future. So we have to figure out ways to kind of put some end caps on phase 1 and focus on phase 2.
Certainly. Well, so I want to shift a little bit. You've touched several times on the climate risk and sustainability risk. And I know that that's a particular area that you're passionate about. Beyond some of the things that might be a bit more obvious, hurricanes. I grew up in a very wildfire-prone area of Northern California. The unfortunate floods that we're seeing that are thousand-year flood zones. Like beyond some of those ones that are really hitting us in the face, what are some other areas of climate risk that you'd want to share with people, and what are some of the things that they can be doing to, at the very least, be aware what their risk threshold is or where they're at, and then maybe taking that a step further, what are some of the things they can be doing to address them?
Yeah, that's a good question, a complex question, I think. So yeah, we have some of those large climate risks that we hear quite frequently about, and then there's some of the climate risks that happen over the long term and create big shifts. And I'm thinking closely about, I live in Arizona, so we have, it's getting hotter for longer periods of time, and it's definitely taking its toll on our plants and wildlife outside. So I spent some time at the local botanical garden with some of their experts, and, we talked about saguaros, which are just like an iconic part of the Southwest, and they're not faring well with the heat. They need summer nights that get under 100 so they can, I don't know all their systems, but so that they can cool off in the ways that they need and consume the water that they need. And we had plenty of nights that never got underneath the 100 degrees. And so they're just not faring well. They're changing colors, which then changes the wildlife that depends on those living systems. And so I think we're just going to see a big shift in the environment over the next couple of years, particularly in areas where we didn't really think it was going to be a significant impact. And for us, I can adapt to that because I have air conditioning at my home. And if I really had to, I have the ability to leave. But there are plenty of people that don't have, that extra money to invest in an air conditioner or turn it on for longer than we needed to. And so that goes back into some of the work that I was doing for my PhD and understanding how people adapt and are resilient to climate change and how some people aren't. If they're already a vulnerable population, then they don't necessarily have the means to adapt and respond. And so these communities that are challenged already are going to face it even in more harsh ways. And so thinking through that, I think, is really important. So not only some of the small ways we can work towards reducing our own emissions and putting pressure on large corporations to reduce their emissions, it's thinking about how the communities that you care about and live within or adjacent to are going to respond to climate change and those impacts, I think, is significant. And what kind of resources they're going to need to be able to do that. We have resources to help, vulnerable communities in other ways, but how do we respond to them around potential climate changes, both those acute and chronic risks?
Yeah. And there's been obviously we're coming off the back of the election, and Dan and I have been talking a lot about policy and regulation. And what are you seeing in the landscape right now that gets you excited, Sotiria? Like, there's a lot of kind of concern and sort of naysayers in the market right now, especially based on maybe the election outcome. But we're actually seeing a lot of positive opportunities. What's getting you excited?
Yeah, definitely shaking off kind of just the immediate thoughts of some of that or some of the hysteria that we hear in the media around different things. But it presents a tremendous opportunity. I mean, we might see a really efficient government that wants to see businesses thrive, which is great for the climate tech community because we need new technology, new innovation in a way that can run in a society that is built like ours in a capitalistic corporate environment. And so I would love to see some of these market influences on some of these technologies really take shape so that we see strong adoption of these new technologies across the board. I don't think we'll see a shift in ESG reporting because it was never really a government component. It was an investor component, and investors know that some factors of ESG are financially material. So if anything, it just makes their work a little more challenging because they were hoping to be able to get a standardized component, standardized features of ESG reporting that were comparable and the same, something that they could track year over year. But now they'll have to figure that out on their own and make sure that companies are reporting in a way that aligns with other companies so they can make those comparisons. So as far as the work goes, plenty of work to do, and I don't think that's going to slow down at all. And then, and climate change impacts companies. We see them, increasing their spend in this area, really understanding that these things are impacting their employees, their supply chains, and their companies in general. And so I think we're going to see them take even more ownership because really the impacts fall on them. So if they don't take that ownership, then they're going to be penalized for it in their business or in their costs. And so we're going to see them take a lot of ownership and not wait for anybody else to make any choices for them. So I think we're going to see just a continued increase in this area for all types of new solutions and people who can help implement those solutions.
Are there, I tend to agree with everything you just shared there. Are there any particular projects that you've been involved in, whether at Whirlpool, the chemical company, and in the commercial real estate firm, any particular projects that you had some awesome learnings or some awesome outcomes come out of that you want to share with our listeners so that maybe they can be inspired to go drive that same type of change?
I think across the board, the collaborative aspect of this work has been something that has quite stood out and something that always tends to surprise me a little bit. I think we go into a lot of these conversations thinking that the answers are going to be no, or that they might be really challenging to get to. But I think there's just this incredible collaborative effort when it comes to solving sustainability challenges or getting people on board to do this work. I think it impacts a lot of people, whatever term we call it or however we think about it. But I think there's just a really great push towards doing a lot of these things. People want to take ownership within their own role. It's also a great way for them to show their company that they are thinking about things new. So if I go to the supply chain and say, hey, let's talk about this risk and let's talk about this data that we need, people are excited to take ownership of some of those projects. It takes them a little bit away from their day-to-day work and allows them to think critically about their own work or about something new within their field in an area that they really care about. So I think that collaborative nature is really awesome. it was quite evident when I was working at the real estate investment trust as well. So I would pitch something to some of our clients, and there was an overall assessment that they probably wouldn't be that excited to spend the money on doing it, but we definitely had some that saw the value in it right away, and we're really excited to have someone on their side to be able to talk through some of these complex topics or complex solutions, and have them on their side and really be able to run ideas past. So that collaborative component of this is exciting, and that helps keep us, I think, all energized in this space, and why people want to continue to join this space, because it really is. It takes a lot of people to make these changes, and if they're on board for it, then it's really exciting.
Nice. Before we jump into the Power Surge closeout, Sotiria, is there anything that's front of mind or on your mind that we haven't covered that you'd like to share?
I think we talked about a lot of things, which is great. And I like to be able to focus on that future outlook of this work. And I was excited that we, were able to talk through some of that. I think there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity, and really thinking on the plus side that people are on board. We do have some of this research behind us. So I think I'm good.
So in terms of being a massive technology lover and advocate, if you could be any energy technology or any sustainability technology, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I am a big proponent of carbon removal and direct air capture. So I think maybe that one, it's a complex area. It's pretty controversial. We're still figuring it out, but then also come with this firm understanding that climate change is happening, and we likely aren't going to reduce our emissions enough to save ourselves from those very severe impacts of climate change. That's a mentality I've had. It might be a little pessimistic, but I think planning for that future is really important, and that's what DAC is planning for.
Certainly, there's many aspects of our world that are very hard to decarbonize. So I see that being a component, like you as well. Also, shifting a little bit on, do you have any favorite kind of resources, books, podcasts, scholarly publications that you frequently review and get your information from?
Yeah, I think the newsletter I always open whenever I get it is the Climate Tech VC newsletter. So CTVC. Just the research out of there seems to be so timely and is exactly the talking points that I need in my work, no matter what kind of conversations I'm having. So highly recommend that one. I know they're transitioning or have transitioned into a data provider called Streamline Climate, I think, as well. So not sure if they've changed the name of the newsletter yet, but that's a good one. And then Dan, you mentioned earlier being able to speak the business language is so imperative to any of this work. And I think I really try to focus on some of those business books. So I know climate change, I know sustainability. There's a lot of new things out there, which is great, but focusing on some of those other business topics that I didn't learn in my sustainability background. My sustainability leaders didn't necessarily go to straight business school either. And so thinking through those. And then a lot of us are moving into management positions really quickly, and we'll start leading really big teams. So I really liked The Making of a Manager. It was a book from a manager, I think, that started at Facebook and Meta, but just really great for that kind of like first level manager, like mid-level managers that might have a larger team. And I think a lot of sustainability people are moving into those roles really quickly.
Love it. I love your passion, love your energy, love your thirst for learning, and constantly pushing yourself and driving action. And so to round us out, Sotiria, in your life, you will have been successful when?
I'll be successful when we have this really established and solid business case for sustainability and understanding climate risk and focusing business money on climate scenario and climate work. So I think once we get that business case really solid and we're not constantly making it over and over, or have a really good template for it, then my work will be successful.
Love that. Well, keep up the awesome work. Really appreciate your time and insights, and love what you're doing. We love following you, and thanks for sharing your time with our listeners.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking with both of you. So this was a great opportunity. Thank you.
Cheers, Sotiria.
Thanks, Sotiria.
Dan, I really enjoy Sotiria's energy and passion for this space, and she's got really unique background. There's not too many people who've worked in such different industries, having come out of a PhD. I really enjoyed that conversation. Any big takeaways?
Certainly for me, the biggest one, and she's lived it being inside of these large organizations where she's trying to influence change, is just ensuring that you have all the right stakeholders from within the company, certainly, and in some cases, folks from outside the company, or in the case of the real estate investment trust that she was a part of, influencing third parties, but just making sure you have all the right people at the table. And this is a multi-stakeholder decision to actually get these things going. So it's kind of falls in line with our core value of empowering co-creation and making sure that everybody has all the pieces that they need to sign off on a project to actually impact the change that is going to benefit the organization.
Yeah,
how about you guys?
Right. Yeah, I think you're spot on. But I think the reality is you can't get stakeholders circled around an outcome without the data and the insights. And I think I really like the comment that we're coming to the end of, say, chapter 1 of the sustainability push. I think a lot of organizations have spent a lot of time and effort trying to capture data, but now they're not sure what to do about it. And it's actually providing that layered intelligence of, how do you turn data and insights into wisdom and next steps? And so I think that's really critical, isn't it, to this stage in the journey for a lot of organizations, is now going and driving some actionable, profitable, sustainable solutions that actually move the needle versus spending money trying to convince yourself that you should be doing something with data, like actually going and doing it. And I think we're seeing this real time, aren't we, right now, Dan? I think we need to do an entire podcast episode on this, but we've seen one of our customers capturing the data to see that they're losing $9 million a year in energy costs or operational costs because they're experiencing these voltage drops, which are impacting their equipment and creating a lot of wear and tear, and they're losing product. And do you want to expand on that case study?
Yeah, as we were talking about climate risk, that was one of the ones that was top of mind for me, because as we get more data and companies become more and more intelligent on when they're running their equipment, or we see a time shift in the time of use rates, and everybody kicks their gear back on, what will ultimately happen is you'll have this voltage sag, either within a facility or more dramatically within a region of the grid. And, we all can see it in our own houses. If a bunch of things kick on at once, the lights dim for momentarily and keep going, which at home, not a big deal. But when you have these pieces of heavy equipment that are producing manufactured goods, that can destroy these equipment. And so when we talk about this climate and sustainability risk, that's one as well, is you can damage millions of dollars worth of equipment and lose millions of dollars worth of product in one of these instances, and it's literally measured down to the milliseconds. And so that customer that you had mentioned, and we'll dive in more detail in a future episode, we're talking $9 million of loss each year just due to voltage sags. And by putting in some equipment on site that can ride through that, conditioning equipment, uninterruptible power systems, can get under a half of a year payback on this, and which is anybody within an organization can get behind a 6-month payback period. So really appreciate all the work that Sotiria is doing to bridge the gap between sustainability and business and actually meaningful change, and tying things back to financial materiality. This will become more and more a topic of conversation, and one that we'll see more companies looking for solutions for.
Yeah, absolutely. And our mission to make this a repeatable process. I think that's key for everyone, isn't it? These can't be bespoke, status quo, manual processes every time. So we need that repeatable process at scale, the empowering technologies. So another great episode. Cheers, Dan.
Cheers,
See you next time. We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible, and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks, and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts, blogs, and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself, and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.